She bought a luxury designer dress for 70% off at an exclusive sample sale, but the moment she put it on, she realized the original owner never took it off. She'd always believed that beautiful things hold power. For a girl who grew up in Witbank, luxury wasn't just about vanity. It was armor against the dust she left behind. By 32, she had built the perfect life, or so she thought. She had always believed that beautiful things hold power. For a girl who grew up in a drafty, face brick house in a struggling suburb of Witbank, luxury wasn't just about vanity. It was armor. Her parents worked themselves to the bone, and their house was always filled with the smell of cheap paraffin heaters and stress. She promised herself she would escape that dust. By 32, she had built what looked like a perfect life. She was a senior architectural consultant in Johannesburg, designing those massive, sleek glass and steel offices for international tech giants. Her apartment in Rosebank was a minimalist masterpiece, all polished concrete and expensive cold furniture. Her closet was like a tiny art gallery. Every label was perfect. Every fabric was chosen to show that she belonged. Then came the annual archival sample sale at Maison Vanneau. Maison Vanneau was an exclusive boutique hidden away in a quiet, leafy corner of Hyde Park. They usually opened their doors to old money and celebrities. But once a year, they cleared out their basement archives. She was browsing through the racks of structured linen suits and silk blouses when she saw it. It was tucked away right at the back, completely separate from the rest. It was a floor-length gown made of heavy, midnight blue silk velvet. The fabric was so deep, so dark, that it didn't just absorb the boutique's harsh spotlights. It seemed to pull the light into itself like deep ocean water. It was unstructured but impeccably tailored. When she reached out and touched it, the velvet felt strangely cool against her skin. Too cool, like glass left out in the winter. There was no price tag on the hanger, just a small handwritten piece of cardboard that read, "Archive sample, as is." She took it into the changing room. When she slipped it over her head, it didn't just fit. It felt like a second skin. It felt like it had been waiting for her specific measurements. But as she zipped it up, the air in the small cubicle suddenly turned freezing cold. She could see her own breath form a faint mist in the mirror. She shook it off, blaming the boutique's aggressive air conditioning, and walked out to the till. The sales associate, an older woman who usually looked down her nose at customers, turned completely pale when she saw the dress over her arm. She didn't look at her face. She just stared at the fabric. "A rare piece," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper as she rang it up. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Never worn. Never made it to the runway." "Why?" she asked, pulling out her credit card. The sales associate refused to meet her eyes. It was a private order. The client changed her mind. They gave it to her for 70% off. It was still a fortune, but for a dress like that, she felt like she had committed a robbery. She walked out into the warm Johannesburg sun, clutching that heavy garment bag like it was a prize. She wore it that very weekend to the grand launch of the Obsidian Tower, a massive skyscraper project she had spent 2 years managing. The party was full of Joburg's elite: politicians, mining magnates, and top designers. She was the toast of the night. Flashbulbs went off every time she turned around. Important hands shook hers. People couldn't stop staring at the dress. They said she looked like royalty. But all night, she felt incredibly uncomfortable. There was a strange, heavy pressure against her collarbone. It felt like a freezing phantom necklace was being pressed against her skin. The fabric around her ribs felt tighter and tighter, as if it were exhaling whenever she tried to inhale. Worse than that were the reflections. Every time she caught her image in the massive glass windows of the tower, looking out over the city lights, a wave of intense dizziness hit her. It wasn't a feeling of pride or success. It was a profound, crushing dread. She looked at herself and thought, "You don't belong here. This glass is a cage." She shook her head, assuming she was just exhausted from the project. But when she went to bed that night, she didn't put the dress away in the wardrobe. She left it out. The anomaly started small, because she didn't want the heavy velvet to get crushed. She put the dress on a wooden mannequin in the corner of her bedroom. On Tuesday night, around 3 in the morning, she woke up suddenly. The room was pitch black, but she could hear something. It sounded like dry autumn leaves scraping against hardwood. Scritch, scritch. She sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The room was perfectly still. The dress hung straight on the mannequin, but the air in the room had completely changed. Her hyper-sanitized, air-conditioned apartment didn't smell like her expensive French perfume anymore. It smelled heavily of ozone, wet earth, and crushed lavender. By Friday, the dreams began. They weren't her dreams. She is a city girl through and through. She knows absolutely nothing about farming or nature, yet every time she closed her eyes, she dreamt of rich, dark soil turning to thick mud under a torrential South African thunderstorm. In the dreams, she was looking down at a pair of rough, calloused hands. They weren't her hands. A man she had never met before was holding them in the dark. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his warmth. In that dream world, she felt a love so fierce it made her chest physically ache. But a second later, that love would vanish, replaced by a despair so hollow and vast it felt like falling down an empty lift shaft. She would wake up gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. Her hands reaching out into the empty bedroom for a phantom person. Then came the voices. She'd be sitting in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting at work, pointing a laser at a blueprint on the wall. Executives would be arguing about budgets, and then a soft, melodic voice would sigh directly into her left ear. "It's too cold here, William. The glass lets too much winter in." She dropped her pen. The entire boardroom went quiet, looking at her. "Are you all right, Tandy?" her boss asked. She nodded quickly, sweating despite the aircon. Her name is Tandy. Her name is definitely not William. That evening, driven by a sudden, frantic impulse, she carried the dress to her kitchen island. She took a small seam ripper and, with trembling hands, she ripped the inner lining near the hidden zipper open. There, stitched into the dark silk with faded silver thread, was a name and a date. Clara, October 14th. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The next morning, instead of working on her architectural designs, she spent hours doing an obsessive deep dive into regional obituary archives online. It took Tandy 3 hours to find her. Clara Vance. She had been a brilliant young botanist living in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. She was famous locally for developing sustainable organic farming techniques. According to the old newspaper articles, she had ordered a custom Velno gown for her 30th birthday gala, which was also supposed to be her engagement party. The date of the party was October 14th. 3 days before the event, Clara walked out of her house, walked through the mist, and stepped into the deep, freezing river behind her family's property. Her body was found 2 days later. She never got to wear the dress. It had been sent back to the boutique's archive depot in Johannesburg, forgotten and untraceable, until Tandy bought it. Clara had never worn the dress in life, but Tandy had worn it, and now Clara was inside her head. Within a month, Tandy's carefully curated life began to completely fracture. She couldn't focus on blueprints anymore. The clean, modern lines of the buildings she used to love suddenly felt sterile, dead, and suffocating. When she looked at the glass skyscrapers of Sandton, she didn't see progress. She saw giant ice cubes trapping people inside. Clara's memories were drowning out her own. She found herself humming old Zulu folk songs and Afrikaans lullabies that she had never heard in her life. One afternoon, she stood in a local supermarket for 40 minutes, buying heirloom tomato seeds and organic fertilizer on total autopilot. She didn't even own a potted plant. Tandy was losing her mind. Her friends stopped calling because she was always staring into space. And back in her apartment, the dress seemed to watch her. The midnight velvet seemed to absorb all the light in the bedroom, making the corner look like a black hole. "I have to return it?" she whispered to the empty room one night. Not the boutique in Hyde Park. They couldn't help her. She had to return it to her. Tandy took a sudden, unannounced week of leave from her form. She packed the heavy midnight gown into a garment bag, threw it into the back of her car, and began the 4-hour drive south towards the rugged, mist-heavy valleys of the Midlands. She told herself she was just being hysterical. She told herself that this was just a psychological ritual, that if she left the dress near Clara's grave, her mind would heal, and she could go back to being Tandy, the successful architect. An hour before she reached the coordinates of the old Vance farm, her phone's GPS completely died. The screen just flickered and went black. But she didn't need it. A quiet, absolute voice in the back of her mind told her exactly which dirt roads to take. Turn left past the old dairy. Turn right at the cluster of weeping willows. She pulled up to a sprawling, dilapidated farm. The wooden barns were peeling and gray. The orchards were overgrown with weeds, as if the clock had stopped the exact day Clara died. The air out there was thick with the scent of wood smoke, wet earth, and lavender. Standing in the mud near an open shed was a man. He was broad-shouldered but terribly thin. His face was hollow, his eyes sunken, and he wore a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was trying to fix a rusted tractor with a wrench, looking completely defeated. When Tandy's car door slammed shut, he looked up. The wrench dropped from his hand, hitting the mud with a heavy, wet thud. He stared at her, or rather, he stared past her, looking directly at the passenger seat where the garment bag lay. His breath hitched, forming a visible cloud of white mist in the crisp, cold country air. "Clara?" he whispered. His voice didn't sound angry or scared. It cracked with a grief so raw and fresh that it felt like a physical blow to her chest. This was William. Tandy didn't just drop the dress and run away like she had planned. She couldn't. The weight in the air was too heavy. William didn't think she was Ghost. At first, when he realized she was a stranger, he thought she was a cruel joke or some journalist trying to dig up old tragedies. But he invited her inside because it was starting to pour with rain. They sat in his drafty, wood-warmed kitchen, drinking bitter chicory coffee. As the storm rumbled outside, matching the dreams she had been having, she told him everything. She told him about the sample sale. She told him about the dreams of the mud, the smell of lavender in a sealed concrete apartment, and the whispers about the glass letting the winter in. When she said those words, "The glass lets too much winter in," William dropped his mug. It didn't break, but the coffee spilled across the table. He covered his face with his rough, calloused hands and began to weep. He confessed that those were the exact words Clara had whispered to him a week before she walked into the river. The anger completely left him. Only a profound shared exhaustion remained between them. He told her his side of the story. The newspapers had gotten it wrong. Clara hadn't taken her life because she didn't love him, or because she hated the farm. She had suffered from severe, silent postpartum psychosis after a hidden, tragic miscarriage. It was a deep, dark mental grief that broke her mind before anyone around her realized how deep the water truly was. She loved the valley, William said, looking out the window at the dying orchards. But she always felt invisible here, like the mist was swallowing her up. She bought that expensive dress because she wanted to feel beautiful. She wanted to finally be seen. After she died, William had been forced to sell most of her belongings to pay off the farm's mounting debts. But the dress had already been sent back to the city depot, lost in the system. He thought he would never see it again. Tandy stayed the night in their drafty guest room. She didn't wear the dress, but she took it out of the bag and laid it gently across an old wooden rocking chair in the corner. For the first time in months, the whispers stopped. She didn't have nightmares about drowning or despair. That night, she dreamt of a warm, bright sun shining over a blooming green orchard. And in that dream, a woman's hand gently let go of hers. She thought she was just returning a cursed piece of clothing. She thought she would hand it over, clear her conscience, and drive back to her luxury Rosebank apartment, her corporate promotions, and her glass towers. But when she looked at her reflection in William's cracked bathroom mirror the next morning, something had shifted. She didn't see the sleek, cold corporate consultant anymore. She saw a girl from Whitbank who had been building her own walls of glass and steel to hide from her own profound loneliness. She had built a perfect life, but it was empty. Clara's ghost hadn't possessed her to haunt her or hurt her. She had dragged her out of her golden cage because she knew someone needed to save William, and someone needed to save Tandy. Tandy never went back to Johannesburg full-time. She went back once to resign and pack her things. She sold her minimalist apartment. She took her years of experience in structural design and brought them there, to the valley. Now Tandy uses her background to help William rebuild the farm. She designed sustainable, energy-efficient greenhouses made of specialized material structures that let the light in but keep the bitter winter out, exactly like Clara had always wanted. The soil is rich again. The orchards are blooming. The midnight blue silk dress doesn't live in a dark closet anymore. It hangs safely in a beautiful glass case in their living room. It is no longer a haunting curse. It is a monument to a woman who wanted to be seen, and a bridge that brought two lonely souls together. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the Midlands valleys on cold October nights, she sees the heavy velvet ripple inside its case, like water, but she is not afraid anymore. Clara gave Tandy her dress, and in return, she gave her a life worth living. If Clara's story gave you chills, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more psychological horror tales. Before you leave, let me know in the comments. Do you believe ordinary objects can hold on to the memories and the grief of their owners? Thank you for listening.